Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum class. MSc First Economics morning session as well as the afternoon session of Spring 2020. uh, First of all, I wish you all the best of luck in this difficult times of coronavirus, and I pray that all of us be safe from this infectious virus, and may we be all safe. Ameen, inshallah. I devised a mechanism to give you the lectures in video format, and this is for the first time that I am gonna record the video lecture, so that some of the concepts that are required to be or that were required to be discussed in the class, that will be discussed in the video format, and I will deliver these videos to you on your WhatsApp, as well as whenever the LMS of the university will be functional, I will also upload the same lectures on that LMS as well. So this is our 12th lecture, and it is in continuation of our previous lecture that was discussed in the class. That was, and if we take an overview of that lecture, that lecture was about demand and the elasticity of demand, in which we discussed that demand is when a consumer is willing to buy and he has also the ability to buy, then that will be considered as demand. And then we discussed various types of elasticities of demand, that in which we discussed that how demand actually respond to change in prices, or to change in income, or to change in the price of the related goods or relative goods, etc. That is complements, complementary goods, or substitute goods, etc., etc. Then we studied different measures to measure the elasticity of demand, that how much change in demand due to change in price, how much change in demand due to change in income, how much change in demand due to price of the related goods. And that was and for that different measures were used, that is percentage method, outlay method, and then more specifically the geometric method, in order to understand the point elasticity and the arc elasticity of demand. Now today we have actually we have to discuss actually the importance of this elasticity, that why we study that elasticity in microeconomics, and how it is applied in real world, and actually its application in the real world. Before going to discuss the importance and its application or implication in the real world, we also have to understand the concept of supply. And I am sure that in your graduation you have already understood the supply, the elasticity of supply, and we just have to go through these concepts. So supply is same as we studied in demand, that demand is a function of price. In the same way, QS is a function of price, and that function or that relationship is actually positive. As we studied demand in consumer perspective, and the basic objective of consumer theory is actually the derivation of demand curve, in the same way the supply is studied in perspective of producer theory, and the objective of producer's theory is actually the derivation of the supply curve, which we will discuss later after this lecture. What's the simplest definition of supply can be? Supply means that the quantity of output that is brought in the market for sale for a certain price is known as supply. And actually, who supplies the output, he is actually the producer. So that's why we study supply in producer perspective. And QS is a function of P, as we have already discussed, and that is the positive function. Why? Because every producer will be wanting that the price should be higher so that the revenues of the producers may be increased. So whenever there is an increase in the prices, there will be increase in the quantity supplied, because producers want that with the increase in the prices their revenues may be increased. So there will be a positively sloped supply curve, as we have already discussed in the demand curve, and that was negatively sloped demand curve. So here we can see that when the price was P1, the quantity supplied was Q1, and as the price increases from P1 to P2, the quantity supply increase from Q1 to Q2. This increase in supply is actually known as the extension in supply, and that is because of the change in goods on price. And if it is vice versa, that if the price falls from P2 to P1, then it is known as contraction in supply. So it means that both the extension and contraction in supply is actually caused by the goods on price. Now, this is not only the single factor that may affect the supply. There are many other factors due to which the supply may be affected. For example, the price of the related goods. Again, the price of the related goods, taxes, subsidies, technology, prices of inputs, etc., etc. There may be many factors that may affect the supply, but in order to understand the relationship between the supply and the price, what is done here, that all these factors are held constant. That's why we call these factors as ceteris paribus. That is the terminologies, that providing all other factors are held constant. You're holding all other factors constant. In order to understand the relationship between the supply and the price, all other factors are held constant. But in actual, these factors are not constant, and they may not be constant. So if there is a change in any of these factors, for example, if there is a change in taxes, if there is a change in subsidies or technology or the price of inputs, what will be the impact on the supply? Because of goods on price, as we have discussed, that there will be an extension and contraction. But if there is a change in these factors which were held constant previously, then what will happen? The supply will rise or fall. Actually, this is rise in supply, this is fall in supply. Rise in supply means that the supply curve shift rightward or outward, and fall in supply means the supply curve shift leftward. And now we can see that the price of that good is same, but because of any of these factors, the prices of the related goods have been changed, the taxes changed, technology changed, and because of some of the factors or one of the factors, the supply has been increased. That is known as, from Q1 to Q2, the supply has been increased from output 1 to output 2, quantity 1 to quantity 2, that is known as the rise in supply. And if there is a fall in the supply because of any of these factors, if the taxes have been increased, if the subsidies have been reduced, if there is a change in technology, the prices of the inputs have been increased, what will happen then? There will be a fall in supply. So the change of any of these factors which were held constant previously is known as rise and fall in supply. That is causing the shift in the supply curve. That's why we call all these factors as the shift factors. That is the factors due to which the supply of the product rises or falls. Now, it has been discussed that there is change in supply due to change in price, but how much change in supply due to change in price, that concept will be understood in the same way as we have already understood while discussing the concept of demand. So that is known as elasticity of supply. In the same way, that is how much change in supply due to change in the prices. How the supplier respond to the changes in prices. And again, its formula is elasticity of price is change in quantity supplied due to change in prices into P over Q. And again here, the elasticity may be equals to 1, elasticity may be greater than 1, elasticity may be less than 1, elasticity may be equals to 0, and elasticity may be equals to infinity. Again, I am not going to discuss all these things in detail because we have already discussed these things in the topic of demand when we were discussing the topic of demand. In the same way, we will be discussing, and I am gonna give you the assignment regarding the examples of goods, what sort of goods may be in which the elasticity of supply is equals to 1 or greater than 1 or less than 1. I will give you the assignment later on. Now here, elasticity of supply is equals to 1, that is the unitary change in supply due to change in the prices. Elasticity greater than 1 means elastic supply. There is more change in supply due to small change in price. Elasticity of supply less than 1 means that because of large change in price, there is small change in supply. Elasticity of supply is equals to 0, that there is no change in supply, that is supply is perfectly inelastic, and elasticity of supply is infinity, that there is a change in the supply whatever the price is. And if we draw the graphs in all these cases, then elasticity of supply is equals to 1. That is the supply curve, and which is showing that equal change in supply, equal change in prices. That's why you call that elasticity of supply is unitary elastic, or we say that supply is unitary supply, that equal change in supply, equal change in prices. And if the elasticity of supply is greater than 1, then the graph will be like that. And here it is evident that a small change in price leads to a large change in quantity supply, that is Q1, that is P1, and if the price gets high, there is a change in supply, and the change in supply is greater than the change in prices. The elasticity of supply is greater than 1, and we call it the elastic supply. Elastic supply. And if the supply is less than 1, that is known as the less elastic supply. In that case, the supply curve will be steep. That is known as the supply curve, and here again it is evident from the graph that there is a large change in prices, but there is only a small change in supply. And if the elasticity of demand is 0, in that case the elasticity of supply will be a straight line, that is elasticity of supply is equals to 0. And that is whatever the change in price is, the supply remains fixed. And when the elasticity of supply is equals to infinity, in that case the supply curve is a horizontally straight line where elasticity of supply is equals to infinity. And we call these two cases where the elasticity of supply is equals to 0 and elasticity of supply is equals to infinity, these are the extreme cases. These are the extreme cases. For example, if we discuss about that elasticity of supply is equals to 0, that is, which means that there is no change in supply due to change in the prices. So what example can be quoted in that case? The first example that may be quoted is the piece of land, that whatever the price may be, the supply of land is same. The supply of land cannot be increased or decreased. Then another example may be quoted as the painting by a painter who have been died, or a painter by a deceased person. There was only one painting that have been made by that particular or that specific painter. Now whatever the price of that painting is, the supply will remain fixed, that the paintings that have been made by these particular painters. Or this supply curve may be elasticity of supply, that is perfectly inelastic supply curve, that may be for the goods which are perishable in nature. For example, the fruits and the vegetables who may be destroyed with a short span of time if they remain unsold. So these are the certain examples when the elasticity of supply is equals to 0. Now I am gonna give you the assignment that what sort of the goods may be when the elasticity of supply is equals to 1, when the elasticity of supply is greater than 1, or the elasticity of supply is less than 1. So this is the assignment that all of you, every class fellow has to make assignment in Word format and give 5 examples of goods in which elasticity of supply is equals to 1, elasticity of supply greater than 1, elasticity of supply less than 1, elasticity of supply 0, and elasticity of supply infinity. Understand? And this assignment has to be submitted by all the class fellows to the CR, and the CR of the class will email me on my email address on 25th of March 2020. Okay, so this is your assignment 4 of spring 2020. Now let's elaborate our lecture further. That is known as equilibrium of demand and supply, or equilibrium of the market. We may also call it the equilibrium of the market. And as we already know that if here is output, if here is prices, and the market is in equilibrium where the demand is equals to supply, which means that nothing should remain unsold and there is no underproduction or no overproduction. That is, everything which is being demanded is also being supplied, and the market is in equilibrium, and the price is equilibrium price and the output is equilibrium output, and we say that the market is in equilibrium. For example, here the price is ₹9 and the output is 600 units, and the market is in equilibrium. If the price increases from, let's assume, 9 to ₹12, now what is happening here? We can see that if this is the demand curve and this is the supply curve, we can see clearly here that here the demand is 400 units, whereas the supply is, let's assume, that is 800 units. So the output, the goods that are being demanded is 400 units, and the goods which are being supplied here are 800 units. So the market is not is equilibrium. So what will happen? The market will be in equilibrium where the demand will be equal to the supply. So the equilibrium will be shifted to point E at equilibrium quantity, that is 6. Again, if we see that the price reduces from, let's assume, 9 to rupees 6. Now again, what is happening here? Here the supply is actually 800 units. The supply is actually 800, sorry, the demand is actually 800 units and the supply is just 400 units. So again, the market is not in equilibrium. The market will be in equilibrium at point E. So the equilibrium will be shifted ultimately to point E. So the market will be in equilibrium because this is the equilibrium of the market, which has been brought into the market by the unfettered forces or the free market forces of demand and supply. There is no intervention of any government or there is no intervention of any other forces. That's why we call this as the free market economy or laissez-faire economy. Free market economy or laissez-faire economy. The terminology you already know, that is laissez-faire economy. Now, let's assume that the economy is not a laissez-faire economy and the prices are not being settled in the market by the forces of the demand and supply, or we can say that not because of the unfettered forces of demand and supply. So it means that there is some sort of intervention from the government. So if we say that the government can intervene in the economy, then that economy is not a free market economy or laissez-faire economy. And let me tell you that the government can intervene in the economy in actually two ways or three ways. By number one, by the imposition of the taxes. Number two, by giving the subsidies, or number three, by the fixation of the prices. Now, by imposition of taxes means that the government can impose the sales taxes or tariffs or duties or customs or any sort of thing that that may be directly imposed on the producers, and they may cause the change in the supply in the market, and because of this there may be any sort of insufficiency in the system may emerge. Then government, by giving subsidies, government also gives subsidies to the producers in order to allow them to compete in the market or for the welfare of the general public in the economy. And then the government can also announce its own price specifically for regulating the monopolies, etc. And with that we will discuss in the coming chapters when we will be discussing the theory of markets. But here, for the sake of simplicity and in order to understand the concept that we are now trying to grab, is if the government intervenes in the economy, for example, initially this is the equilibrium. This is the equilibrium price. This is the equilibrium output. And we say that the economy is in equilibrium at point E, where the demand is equals to supply. Now let's assume that the government imposes tax. What will be the impact of that imposition of tax? That either it's a sales tax, or it's cess, or it's duty, or it's a custom, or it's a tariff. The impact will be directly on the price of a certain good, and obviously it will be imposed on the output per unit of output. So the price of that good will be increased. Now the suppliers are actually very rational people, and they assess that if the price of any sort of good will be increased, its demand will go down. So will it be rational for them to produce the same quantity as before the change in any sort of taxes or prices of the goods? Definitely the answer for the supplier is no. So what will they do? They will actually reduce the supply of that goods. So what is the initial impact of the imposition of tax is, whenever the taxes is imposed, but the taxes are imposed by the government, the suppliers take it negatively, and obviously they assume that the prices of the goods are gonna be increased because of the imposition of the taxes, because obviously they have to pass on the burden of that tax on to the consumers. They don't want to bear all the burden on their shoulders, and that's what we will understand by doing different illustrations, that what is the importance of actually these elasticity and this. So for the time being, what you have to learn is, or you have to understand is that whenever the taxes are imposed, its initial impact on the supply is that the supply of that particular good shrinks in the market. Now let's assume that government has imposed the taxes. What will be the impact? That there is fall in the supply of that good. There is a fall in the supply of that good, and the supply curve shifts from S to S prime. Now this is what we call as the new price, that is P1, and that has been increased because the taxes have been imposed on the goods. Now if we see here that this is actually point E, and if I give that point the name E1 and that point the name E2, let's assume, you can see a triangle that is E1 and E2, and that triangle is actually known as the Harburger triangle. Harburger triangle, and that triangle, the name is attributed to actually Arnold Harburger, an economist who actually criticized this imposition of taxes, and he said that there is inefficiency cost, there emerged the inefficiency in the system, and there is always a cost that has to be borne either by the producers or by the consumers. So this Harburger triangle refers to the loss of the society. So actually what this triangle means is, or what this triangle is referring to as, the loss of society, or that may be named as the dead weight loss. Dead weight loss, that is loss to the society. This upper triangle, a small upper triangle, this one, is known as loss to the consumer. and this lower triangle, this small lower triangle in blue shaded area, that is known as the loss to producer. So there are two major sections of the society. The one is producer and the other is consumer. So the upper portion of the triangle is referring to as the loss to the consumer, the lower portion is the loss to the producer. And if I draw a line from here to here, that is P2. Now this portion is actually known as the gain of the government. That is known as the gain of the government. Now, why we are saying this, that this red portion is the loss or to the consumer? That is because that initially the consumer was paying the P star price, and after the imposition of tax, definitely the consumer is paying the more price, that is P1. So the price has been increased and the burden has been shifted on the shoulders of the consumer to bear the burden of that tax in the form of price. And again, initially before the imposition of that tax by the government, the producer was actually getting the P star of the price, but after the imposition of tax, the producer is actually getting the low price, that is P2. And that is the gain of the government. And why are we saying the gain of the government? That will be cleared, or we may get our concepts more cleared by doing an illustration. Let's start our illustration to understand this, that why are we saying that this is the loss to the society, this is loss to the consumer, this is loss to the society, this is the gain of the government, and what sort of elasticity of supply or what sort of elasticity of demand may be, so that the burden may be shifted on to the consumers or to the producers, or the whole of the burden is to be borne by the producer, or all the burden has to be shifted to the consumer. We have to see all these things. Now, practical illustration. QD is equals to 150 minus 50p, that is known as the demand function, and the supply function is QS is equals to 60 plus 40p. Now, what will be the equilibrium price or equilibrium quantity? As we know that the market is in equilibrium where the demand becomes equals to the supply. So quantity demand is equal to quantity supply, and we know that quantity demand is 150 minus 50p and supply is 60 plus 40p. 150 minus 60 is equals to 40p plus 50p, or 90 is equals to 90p, or P is equals to 90 divided by 90 is equals to 1. So the equilibrium price is equals to 1, and if we put that value either in the demand function or in the supply function, we will get the equilibrium quantity. So QD is equals to 150 minus 50p is equals to 150 minus 50 into 1, that is 100. So the equilibrium quantity is 100 and the equilibrium price is 1. before any change in the taxes, and that equilibrium price and that equilibrium quantity is determined by the market, by the free forces of the market, of demand and supply. That is we call as the free market economy. Now let's assume that the government imposes 50 paisa tax, 50 paisa 50 paisa tax per unit of output. 50 paisa tax per unit of output. Now let's assume that the government has imposed a tax of 50 paisa tax per unit of output, and let it is denoted by T. Before imposition of tax, the equilibrium price is ₹1 and the equilibrium quantity is 100 units. Now, as we have already discussed, that whenever the tax is imposed by the government, its impact is actually on the supply function. The supply function shifts outward or shift inward. There is a rise in the supply or there is a fall in the supply. Now, as a 50 paisa tax has been imposed by the government, so there will be a change in the supply function. Now let's see that what will be the change in the supply function. The supply function will be changed like that, that is QS is equals to 60 plus 40 into P minus T. Now that T is actually 0.5 because 50 paisa tax per unit of output, it means the tax is actually 0.5. Now put this value in this function, that is P minus 0.5, that is known as 60 plus 40P minus 0.5 into 40, that is 20, or the supply function will become, that is 60 minus 20 is 40 plus 40P. So the new supply function will become 40 plus 40P, that is after imposition of tax by the federal government. Now again, if we want to evaluate the prices after the imposition of tax and the output after the imposition of tax, then what we have to do is again that quantity demand is equals to the quantity supplied, and that will be now marked as static because it is now changed than that supply function, because it is the supply function that is after the imposition of taxes by the government, and now it is a changed supply function. Now put the value, that is 150 minus 50P is equals to 40 plus 40P. If we simplify for price, 150 minus 40 is equals to 40P plus 50P, or 110 is equals to 90P, or P is equals to 110 over 90. Now in calculator its value is 1.22. So the price after tax is calculated as P double star, that is denoting that the price after tax is 1.22, and that is slightly higher than the price before imposition of tax, that is price is equals to 1. That is the impact of the tax that has been imposed by the government. That government has imposed the 50 paisa per unit of output tax, and the price has been increased from rupees 1 to 1.22 per unit of output. Now what will be the impact on the quantity? Now put that P in either of the function, either it may be demand or supply. Now let's put it in demand function, that is 150 minus 50 P, 150 minus 50 into 1.22. So uh, 89. Its answer is 89. So the supply has been reduced from 100 units to 89 units. The price has been increased from rupees 1 to 1.22. And that again will be marked as Q star star, that is the quantity after imposition of tax and the price after imposition of tax. Now we have to evaluate the loss to the consumer. Now the P double star is 1.22 and Q double star that we have calculated is 89 units. So we have to calculate the loss of consumer. Loss of consumer. Before imposition of any tax, the consumer was paying rupees 1 for one good, for 1 unit, and now the consumer is paying rupees 1.22 for per unit of that good. So it means that now the producer is actually paying 0.22 extra in lieu of the taxation that has been imposed by the government. Now this is known as the burden of tax on the consumer, that initially the consumer was paying just rupees 1, and after imposition of tax the government has to pay extra 0.22 per unit of output, and the new price is, as we have already calculated, is 1.22. Now we have to calculate the loss of producer. As we can see here that the new equilibrium price after tax, that is P double star, is 1.22, but the 50 paisa tax is also included in that price. And what is tax is? That is 0.5. So what is the actual price that the producers are getting? Because that 0.5 or 50 paisa is going in the pocket of the government, not in the pocket of the producers actually. So actually what the producers are getting, that is 1.22 minus 0.5, that is 0.5. 0.72. So actually the price that the producers are getting is 0.72, just 72 paisa of per unit of output they are getting, in the 0.72 per unit of their output. And before the imposition of tax they were getting rupees 1 for the same good. So it means that before imposition of tax the consumers were getting what? Rupees 1. After imposition of tax the producers are getting 0.72 only. So it means that the producer's loss is 1 minus 0.72 is 0.28. So this 28 paisa, 0.28, is being borne by the producers, that before imposition of tax the producers are getting actually 1 rupee per unit of output, and after impositions of tax the producers are just getting rupees 0.72, because actually the price is 1.22 and 50 paisa tax is included in rupees 1.22. so this amount of tax is actually going into the pocket of the government. So the producers are actually getting just 0.72. So this is the producer's loss, that is 0.28. So we can see here that actually the 50 paisa tax per unit of output was imposed by the government, and 0.28 plus 0.22 is actually known as is actually equals to 0.5. So it means that this is actually the loss to the society. Some of the loss is being borne by the consumer and some of the loss is being borne by the producer. It means that the producers have not shifted the entire burden of that tax on the consumers. And what is the government gain here? Government gain. The total units of output being supplied after tax are 89 into tax is 0.5. So 89 into 0.5 is 44, 2s are 88, 44.5 something. That is known as the government gain, or the revenue that the government generates by the imposition of tax. Now it's the time to understand the importance of the elasticity of supply, that if the demand function is now let me write here, that is CL, that is consumer loss, was 0.22 paisa. PL, that is producer's loss, is 0.28. The government gain or government revenue, GR मैं लिख देता हूँ, GR, the government revenue is 44.5 rupees. Now the demand function is 150 minus 50p, and the supply function is 60 plus 40p. Now as we know that the formula of elasticity of demand is dq upon dp into p upon q. In the same way the elasticity of supply formula is dqs over dp into d into p over qs, and this is qd. Now if we differentiate the demand function with respect to price, that is dqd upon dp, then it means that it is minus 50. In the same way, dqs over dp is equals to 40. And we know that price is 1, the quantity is 100. So P over Q is 1 over 100. So if we put the values in dq over dp is minus 50, P is 1, Q is 100. So its elasticity of demand is minus 50 by 100 is equals to 0.5, that is minus 0.5, which is actually elasticity of demand is less than 1. It means that the elasticity of demand is less elastic or inelastic. In the same way, if we derive the elasticity of supply, the elasticity of supply will be, that is 40 into, we know that P is 1, quantity is 100, that is 0.4, and elasticity of supply is here again less than 1, which means that the elasticity of supply is also less elastic or inelastic supply. Now, elasticity of demand is equals to 0.5, and again the sign negative is showing the inverse relationship between the demand and the price, and the elasticity of supply is 0.4, and both the elasticity of demand as well as the elasticity of supply are less elastic. Now if we draw the graph, of demand and supply and the market equilibrium, if here is the output, here is the price. Now elasticity of demand is 0.5, it means the demand curve is steeper, and if it is 0.5, then definitely the demand curve is steeper. That is known as the demand curve, where the elasticity of demand is equals to 0.5. And now the elasticity of, so we have to draw the supply curve, and here the elasticity of supply is 0.4. It means the supply is little bit more inelastic than demand, because its value is 0.4 and its value is 0.5. So we will draw the supply curve inelastic or less elastic, but that will be relatively more steeper than that demand curve because its value is 0.4. Now let's start the supply curve. That will be more steeper relative to demand curve. Yes. Now here we can see that the supply curve is relatively more steeper than the demand curve, because the value of supply curve is elasticity of supply is 0.4. Now we can see here that the P star, that is equilibrium price, was ₹1 before imposition of tax, and the equilibrium quantity, that is Q star, was 100 before imposition of tax. When the tax was imposed, the price was increased from ₹1 to 1.22, that is from 1.22. Let's assume that here it is the price, that is the price has been increased, that is P star, and it is 1.22 rupees, and the output has been reduced from 100 to 89. Now it is the same diagram that I have already drawn to give you some concepts regarding the Harburger triangle and the loss of the society or inefficiency in the system. All these things means, so let's call it P triple star, that is what it is, that is 0.72, that was calculated previously, that is the price that actually the producer is getting after the imposition of the tax. Now we can see here that it is what? The consumer loss. The consumer loss is 0.22, and that loss is actually 0.22. And this is the producer's loss, that is actually 0.28, 0.22 and 0.28, and this is actually loss to the society, that is being depicted by the Harburger triangle. That is, upper triangle is showing the loss to the consumer, the lower triangle is showing the loss to the producer, and the overall this Harburger triangle is showing the loss to the society, and that is the loss of the society because of the imposition of tax by the government, and that is actually known as what? The government gain, and which is actually 44.5 rupees. So here we have understood that if the supply curve is relatively more elastic, then the more burden will be borne by the consumer. If the supply curve is less elastic, the more burden will be borne by the producer actually. Now let's do another illustration, and let's clarify our concepts more, that if the demand and supply function changes, and again the government imposes certain sort of taxation, then what will be the impact on the society? Let's start another illustration. I hope that कि आप सबको कुछ ना कुछ समझ आ रहा होगा, और ये मेरे लिए जो है बिल्कुल एक न्यू तजर्बा है कि कैसे मैंने जो है वो लेक्चर देना है, और without any audience delivering lecture is a unique experience actually for me. Now illustration number 2 है जनाब. Illustration number 2, and here the demand function, that is QD, is equals to, is the same as that of the previous one, 150 minus 50p. The supply function is going to be changed, that is 50 plus 50p, that is QS is equals to 50 plus 50p. Now अब मैं जल्दी जल्दी से करूँगा क्योंकि now you have the idea कि इसको हमने कैसे करना है, और नीचे बैठ बैठ के मेरी टांगें भी एक्चुअली थक गई हैं. So QD is equals to QS. 150 minus P is equals to 150 minus 50P is equals to 50 plus 50P. ये है 150 minus 50 is equals to 50P plus 50P, or 100 is equals to 100P, and again the P is equals to 1, that is known as P star. The price that is before any government interference or government intervention, it is the equilibrium price, and that is the price which is determined by the market, by the unfettered forces or free market forces of demand and supply. That's why we call it a free market economy. And the equilibrium quantity is can be calculated by putting the P in either the demand function or the supply function. आप किसी में भी डालेंगे तो आपके पास equilibrium quantity आ जाएगी जी. So QD is equals to 150 minus 50P. So 150 minus 50P क्या है जनाब? 1. So 150 minus 50, again the equilibrium quantity is 100, that is Q star. So Q star is 100, that is the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity before intervention of the government and before the imposition of tax by the government. Now let's assume that the government imposes tax again. For simplicity of understanding, I say that the government imposes tax that is equals to 50 paisa per unit of output. 50 paisa per unit of output. Now, as we have already understood that the initial impact of that imposition of tax is always on the supply function. So the supply function will be changed. What will be the impact on supply function? That is QS is equals to 50 plus 50 into P minus T. When the government intervenes by imposing the taxes, then this will be known as P minus T. And when the government imposes government gives any sort of subsidy, then this will be added in the price, that will become the P plus T. Because whenever the taxes are imposed, the quantity supplied shrinks, and whenever the subsidies are given by the government, then the supply is increased in the market. So if the value of that T is, if the value of that T is 0.5, the supply function will become, that is 50 plus 50P minus 25, or that will become 25 plus 50P, that is your supply function. So this is the changed supply function or the new supply function after imposition of the tax. Now again we have to work out the equilibrium prices, the equilibrium quantity after imposition of the taxes. So again we have to equate the demand and the supply. The new supply function is QS star, that is 25 plus 50P. So again the equilibrium condition is the demand becomes equal to the supply, that is quantity supply star, and the demand function is 150 minus 50p is equals to 25 plus 50p. 150 minus 25 is equals to 50p plus 50p, and 150 minus 125 is equals to 100p, and that is p is equals to 125 divided by 100, that is equals to 1.25. So the equilibrium price after imposition of tax is 1.25. When the government imposes taxes, the price increases from rupees 1 to 1.25. So there is an increase in price of 25 paisa by the imposition of 50 paisa per unit of output tax. Now, what is the equilibrium quantity in the market? Either the quantity is being increased or decreased. Put that price, the value of that price in either of the function, either it may be the demand function or supply function. Let's put it in the demand function. The answer will be the same in either cases. QT is equals to 150 minus 50 into 1.25. 150 minus 50 into 1.25. $87.5 is the answer. 87.5 is the answer. So the equilibrium quantity after tax is 87.5. And what is, now we have to calculate the loss to the society, actually the loss to the consumer, the loss to the producers, the government gains, and what is the elasticity is actually that how the producers has transferred the burden of tax on the shoulders of the consumers. So let's work out the loss of consumer. Loss of consumer. Now, before imposition of tax, the consumer was paying rupees 1. And after imposition of 50 paisa of tax, how much the consumer is paying per unit of output? That is rupees 1.25. It means that 0.25 rupees extra is being paid by the consumer after imposition of the tax. So this 0.25 is known as the consumer loss. Now, what is the producer loss? Loss of producer. Before imposition of tax, the producer was getting what? Rupees 1. After imposition of 50 paisa tax, the price of the product has become rupees 1.25, but out of this 1.25, actually 50 paisas are going into the pocket of government. This 0.5 is not going into the pocket of the producer actually. So what the producer is actually getting, he is 0.75. This is known as the producer loss. No, this is not the producer loss. This is actually the price the producer is getting 0.75 paisa. And what will be the producer loss? Before imposition of tax, the producer was getting rupees 1. After imposition of tax, the producer is getting 0.75. So what is the producer's loss? That is 0.25 paisa. That is 1 minus 0.75. So that is known as producer's loss. And here we can see that the consumer loss is 0.25 as well as the producer's loss is 0.25. So the equal burden of that tax is being borne by the producer and the consumer. In the previous illustration, we have seen that the producer borne the higher burden of the tax on his shoulders and transfer some part of the portion to the consumers as well. But here the burden of the tax is being borne by the producers and consumers equally. So the producer has shifted half of the burden onto the consumer, and half of the burden of that tax is being borne by the producer himself. So consumer loss, again I am writing as CL, that is consumer loss is 0.25, producer's loss is 0.25 here again. And what is the government gain here? The government gain is 87.5 into 50. 87 point, that is government gain, 87.5 into 0.5, that is 43.75. $43.75 is the government gain, government revenue we may call it. Now, what is the elasticity of supply and elasticity of demand? Elasticity of demand is dq over dp into p over q, and dqs, elasticity of supply, dqs over dp into p over q. Now, if we differentiate the demand function, that is dq, with respect to price, that is dp, then it is minus 50, and here again dqs over dp is equals to 50. And as we know that price is 1 and the quantity is 100, so if we put the values in elasticity formula, that is minus 50 into 1 over 100, that is 0.5, and with the minus sign, which is showing the negative relationship between the price and the quantity demand. And here again elasticity of supply is equals to 50 into price is 1, quantity is 100, and the elasticity of supply is 0.5. And again the elasticity of demand is less than 1, that is inelastic. Elasticity of supply is less than 1, that is also inelastic. But mind it here that both the values are same, that is 0.5 and 0.5. Both the demand function and the supply function will be equally steep. So if we draw the graphs, here we can write here that elasticity of demand is minus 0.5, elasticity of supply is equals to 0.5. Now, if we draw the graph of the situation, here it is output, here it is price. If we draw the demand function, that is steeper, that is 0.5. its value is elasticity of demand is 0.5, so it will be steeper. Elasticity of demand is less than 1, and the supply function will also be equally steeper as of the demand function. Now this is the equilibrium price, this is the equilibrium quantity, which was equals to rupee 1 and which was equals to 100 unit. And when the government imposes taxes of 50 paisa, the price becomes the price becomes 1.25 and it becomes 87.5. now you can see from the diagram that if this is E, this is E1, this is E2, and this is the price, that is 0.75, which is actually being gotten by the producer after the imposition of tax. So this is what we call as the Harburger triangle. Harburger triangle, which is showing the loss to the society or loss of the society. The upper triangle is showing the loss of the consumer, which is equals to 0.25 here, and this is again showing the loss of the producer, which is equals to 0.25. and here from the triangles, the size of the triangles is same, that is the loss of the consumer is actually equals to the loss of the producer, and that is known as the government gain, that is 43.75. so it is quite evident from the graph, from the Harburger triangle, that the loss is being shared by both the producers and the consumers, and the producer has shifted the burden of that tax on the consumers partially, that is half of the burden is being borne by himself and half of the burden of tax is being borne by the consumer. So the producer has passed on the effect of that tax on the consumers, but not fully, by half of that amount, and that is because of the elasticity of the demand